Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are taking a look at some tips, 4 tips for preparing your stash tab for migration from League to Standard. Those of you that have been around for a while know that we've got a table of contents that's directly above me, so you can simply jump to different sections of the video that interest you. Today we're going to be looking at 4 different tips, or 4 different really factors to keep in mind as you are thinking about preparing your stash for Standard League. You can of course give us a like, a subscribe, and ring the bell in order to be notified about more videos just like this one. So there are 4 factors that you want to keep in mind, and we're going to go over each of these in a little bit more detail. But the first thing that you want to keep in mind is goals, your own goals for your items that you are bringing with you from the League into Standard. What sorts of goals do you have for those items? We've got a couple of questions regarding your goals for those items, whether or not you're actually going to want to take the time to organize your stash tab and manage it in League at the end of a League, migrating it to Standard. Secondly, you're going to want to evaluate the value of your migrating goods. In other words, what is it that you value and you want to bring with you versus what is it that you simply don't care about? You can convert it into currency versus what might actually be a highly valued ticket item in League but maybe is less valued in Standard, or vice versa, something that isn't as valued in League but could be worth more in Standard League. Thirdly, a third factor to consider is the tabs that you own. In other words, the amount of tabs that you have and the amount of tabs that you have available in Standard League can actually be a big factor for how you're going to proceed with organizing and preparing your stash tab for migration. And lastly, we'll wrap up with a little discussion on the vision for your Standard stash tab, with of course some concluding questions for you all to jump in on. I love the comment section of all of our videos, and I'm very appreciative that we've got such an active and awesome community that hangs out and gives one another tips. So we've got discussion questions, yes, about stash tabs at the very end of our discussion today. So first off, goals. What sort of goals do you have for your stuff as it comes in to Standard League from a particular challenge league? You want to identify your goals prior to organizing your stash tab, because obviously if you have 0 interest in interacting with Standard, that changes your goals. If you've got goals of simply hoarding wealth in Standard, that's going to change the way how you organize your stash tabs in preparation for migration. So first off, first question, do you want to play in Standard? Are you actually going to take the time to play in Standard? Oftentimes when a league shuts down, there's about 2 to 3 days, maybe 4 days, I think have been the longest that I've ever seen and participated in, but maybe 5 as the most. So you've got to ask yourself, do I want to take and play in Standard for those 4 or 5 days, and that's the only time I'm ever going to play in Standard? Or are there going to be other times where I do play in Standard? Oftentimes about halfway through a league, I'll go back and start revisiting my own characters in Standard that I want to mess around with, test different builds out, make different video guides with, and really just have a great time with. So Standard offers that as an option. So it would be nice maybe for you to have a sandbox style opportunity to mess around with characters. And so if you enjoy that sort of thing, Standard is of course going to be the best way to do that. Then maybe you were close to a particular goal but you didn't quite complete it in a league. So maybe fulfilling your Atlas, or killing Shaper, taking down Elder, reaching level 100. Maybe you had another particular goal for a certain level of currency that you wanted to grind for, or a certain type of item that you wanted to be able to purchase. So maybe you were close to that goal in League, but you weren't quite there yet. And so maybe you're going to want to continue with that pursuit of that goal, migrating into Standard League and continuing that same goal, either with your same character or with the currency and items that you have available to you. A third goal to consider is, do you have friends who play in Standard that you want to help? So obviously I reach out to a lot of different new players who are new to Path of Exile. I do that through Reddit, through Discord, as well as through the official forums. Pretty much I just love helping and teaching people who are new to the game. And so I know many of you who are in our community also do the same, where you introduce your friends how to play Path of Exile, and oftentimes playing in challenge leagues can be challenging, because a lot of the times people that are just getting a taste or a feel for Path of Exile don't necessarily want to dedicate themselves to learning the game and really playing through all of the different options that they could play during a particular league. So a lot of the times people, maybe by accident or through advice, will actually start the game in Standard. So if you've got friends that you want to teach or play alongside in Standard, that's another factor as you're organizing your stash tab. I know that there was actually one league where I actually just had a whole stash tab filled with items that I was going to help another character out, a buddy of mine who was just starting to play PoE. So I just had a bunch of stuff that I was going to bring over, so that way as he leveled his character, he would have different things that would be available to him, different options, different items, different currencies. So that's a third goal that you might just want to keep in mind. Fourthly, if you don't play Standard, then consider gambling everything away. So down below in the video description, we've got a link to our video on 5 fun ways to gamble away all of your currency at the end of a league. And that is something that you can do. If you simply don't want to take the time to interact with your stash tab or migrate it over, then there are lots of ways that Path of Exile gives us to free ourselves from our own currency and items. There's plenty of ways to do that. So even if you're not interested in migrating your stash over, there's still options for you. All right, secondly, the second factor to keep in mind after you've established what sort of goals you have is the value of the migrating goods in terms of items and currency that you're bringing over. So you're going to want to check prices of items in Standard League versus the in-league price of the items. And you want to check and see items that will go up in price during the migration. So particularly those 4 or 5 days, however many days it is in your particular instance as you're watching the video now, where there is a bit of a lull, a dead period while patch notes are coming out and while everything is in kind of the final swing of a hype cycle for a new league. There's those 4 or 5 days where there's no league, and so everybody that logs on to play Path of Exile logs in to play Standard. And so a lot of people who don't do stash tab management prior to a migration will have their listings and their sales still be there. They'll log into Standard, but they'll all be price adjusted for the league. They won't be price adjusted for Standard. So yes, I can tell you for certain I have done this and made the mistake of for certain selling things at lower price than what they were valued at in Standard, simply because Standard does have a little bit more different economy. It's got a little bit more inflated prices. We've also got a video on that, why our price is so different in Standard, which will be linked down below that you can check out. But the bottom line is this: you're going to want to evaluate items and currency that you're bringing over in league prices versus Standard prices, and then obviously try to convert those items into and currency into whatever the ratio is that's most beneficial to you. So for instance, there was one particular league a couple leagues ago where I had a bunch of currency in league, and I noticed that the ratio still had a lot of room to move on divine orbs between the in-league price and the Standard price. In other words, as everybody migrated into Standard, the prices and the value of the divine orbs was actually going to go up. So what I did was I went out and I bought a bunch of divine orbs. I simply turned like all of my currency into divine orbs in league, so that way as soon as I converted over into Standard, I could then sell those divine orbs for a much, much higher return in numerical value of chaos, of exalts, etc., of converted currency once I was in Standard for those 4 or 5 couple of days that the trade league is just going crazy in Standard while everybody's waiting for the new league. So that's just one example of things to keep your eye out for. So if you've got highly valued items, you're going to want to check. Maybe you've got a double corrupted item that simply hit ridiculous rolls. Maybe you've got a particular unique item that is maybe best in slot for a particular build. Maybe you've got a unique item that's changing its roles. So in other words, it's going legacy. There's a lot of different ways that you can check this. The best way that I would recommend is to simply check on PoE Ninja and to check the trending prices on the current league that you are in versus the Standard league prices of those same uniques, and just to check and see really quickly if you've got a couple of really highly valued uniques or not. And you should have a good indicator of this. For those of you that are saying, oh my goodness, Iron, this is going to be so much work to check all my uniques. You don't have to check all of your uniques. What you can do is simply know that the uniques that were most expensive for you and for your builds throughout the league are probably going to hold some level of similar value in Standard. So you're just going to want to check those highest priced uniques and then scale down from there until you feel like you have done your due diligence on your uniques, and you won't feel like you're getting ripped off if you sell something for an underpriced valued listing. Secondly, you're going to want to check those conversion rates on currency. I already gave the example of divine orbs, but I'll give another quick example. Of course, exalted to chaos ratios are always fluctuating throughout the course and the history of Path of Exile, but you're going to want to check everything based off of the exalt to chaos ratio. So if the exalt to chaos ratio still has room to go up into standard, then that's great. You can go out and buy a whole bunch of exalts and know that they're going to hold their value moving into standard. If the ratio has to go down in order to meet what standard is at, it gets a little bit more tricky because sometimes the standard league prices do come up to meet migrating league prices, but most oftentimes not, which means there's actually going to be a crash in the value of your exalted orbs, and you're actually going to want to get out from under them and turn them into chaos before they actually lose value moving into standard league. Thirdly, are any of the mods that you have going legacy? Now, I mentioned this earlier about unique items, but this is also true for rare items. So I'll give an example of this really quickly. So in Bestiary League, there were several different rare items that you could acquire and roll that had aspects on them. And for the duration of time that Bestiary was not a part of the core of Path of Exile, there was a time at which those items were very, very expensive as they moved over from Bestiary League into Standard League, because while you couldn't necessarily reroll or recraft those items, maybe if an item was a high ticket item in League that included those specific subsets of those aspects, they would of course hold their value and still be a high ticket item in standard. So you're going to want to check and see if there are any mods going legacy. Oftentimes those mods can simply be changes in numbers, numeric value, but sometimes it can be the entire mod being removed from a particular set of items or a particular item itself, simply because GGG has determined that it's just too powerful. So you're going to want to check and see what mods, if any, that you own are going legacy. All right, thirdly, let's talk about tab space and usage. So when you're considering the types of tabs that you own and use in standard, you're going to want to evaluate how you use those tabs and how to most efficiently store things in those tabs. So whether or not you've got just regular stash tabs and you're a totally free-to-play player, that's fine. You can do this as well. If you've got the map stash tab, card, divination card stash tab, the essence tab, the fragment tab, the currency tab. I've got all of this stuff because of the supporter packs that I've gotten over the number of years that I've played PoE. It's great, but I'll let you know this, even with a bunch of different tabs, it's still quite a bit of work as you are preparing to migrate your tabs from League into Standard. So you're going to want to consider what types of tabs you have before you approach a strategy for moving things over. Otherwise, you're just going to be clicking and moving stuff from your inventory into different tabs and going, wait, how was it that I wanted to organize these? Because every single league, there's different iterations, there's different bugs, and there's of course different unique items and unique currencies, unique maps, even potentially unique fragments that get added to the game. So you're going to want to consider the exact types of tabs that you own, and maybe even the types of tabs that you're going to own for the duration of the next league, because of course if you buy new tabs, you can always simply move those items and organize those items into those new tabs very, very quickly and very, very easily. So first off, if you're tight on tab space in standard, you're going to want to consider converting as much as you can in the league into currency, because currency slots in the currency tab, if you own that, currency slots fit 5k value in there. So unless you're converting everything into wisdom scrolls and you've just got hundreds of thousands of wisdom scrolls, your currency tab is probably going to be able to hold a lot of stuff. So as long as you can just keep converting things into probably chaos and above in terms of ratios of value, you're probably going to be fine with a single currency tab. I will also give you a quick reminder, the rows of individual slots at the bottom of the currency tab also hold 5,000 value of whatever it is that you fit in there. So if you've got, let's say, 5,000 of a particular sort of currency, and that's already fit into its normally slotted spot, sectioned and partitioned in the currency tab, you can always dump another row of 5,000 all the way down throughout the bottom of the currency tab. So that's just something to keep in mind. Next, if you are tight on tab space in standard, then you're going to want to consider keeping gems inside their items from their characters, and then either store those items on characters or in their inventory or in stash tabs themselves. So a couple of different tips and tricks here. So first off, a lot of the times when players are evaluating their items and putting them up for sale, they are of course removing gems from them and listing them in a public trade tab that is available for others to search and see for purchase. However, if you know you're migrating stuff and you're not necessarily going to sell that piece for now, so in other words, this is an item you've identified you're going to keep, there is no reason not to store gems inside it that you may in the future want to use. So if in any way your goals of migrating things over into standard include that you want to potentially use standard as a sandbox and therefore use gems in order to create and try out different builds and different build combos, if you've already got gems that are already leveled up, it saves you the time from going out and buying other gems from other people if you just keep them. So keep them socketed away. I know several different people inside our guild, inside the Good Guy Gaming Guild, that do this, and they actually store hundreds of level 20 plus corrupted level 21 gems inside their items, inside their stash tabs. It's a great way to store stuff. One of the things that I used to do was I used to just have tab after tab after tab of like blue gems, green gems, red gems, because I was always scared that gems would go, legacy, or they might remove a skill from the game. And in my noobness, I just didn't realize, if they remove the skill from the game, then the gem probably won't work. Like, it'll probably break. Like, how silly was I thinking? Anyway, so I just had tabs filled with gems. What a terrible idea. Just socket those gems inside an item and then stick the item where you'd like it to go, so that way you've got a more organized and conservative approach to your tab usage. Also, if you've got items on your characters, I would leave them on your character until you know for a fact that you are going to re-roll or remake that character using something else. So I've made the mistake several different times on the numerous characters that I've got on standard of pulling items off of characters and then putting them in stash tabs, so that way I can at least evaluate them and look at them as a potential piece of gear for another character. But the reality is, if you keep everything on your character, you can always pull up your character regardless of where you are. Even if you don't have access to your main PC that you're playing Path of Exile on, as long as you've got access to the internet, you can actually access your characters as long as your profile is set to public, where you can go and access your characters and look through and see, which character had that awesome item, which character had that lore weave, which character had that impulses, which character had that Comb's heart, which characters was I using those awesome rare weapons on, which character had the level 23 corrupted gem on it or whatever, right? You can go through and look up that information even on your mobile device, on your phone, on a laptop, wherever you've got internet access to, as long as it's still on your character. So I know that I've done that oftentimes as I'm interacting and traveling and away from my PC, where I'm wondering, if I want a theory craft build, which of my characters has that particular item on it? So just leave it on your character. Also, don't waste space in your inventory. So your character's inventory can carry a whole bunch of stuff. So if you're worried about stuff being in remove only tabs, or if there's something that's particularly memorable or something that you'd like to particularly have stand out, you can always migrate that stuff over in your character's inventory slot themselves. Thirdly, if you have extra space on standard, consider item categories for items. So I know a lot of different people have a lot of different philosophies of how they organize, but here are just some tips. I'd love to hear some tips from all of you down below, so leave us a comment down below, but here's a couple of them. You can have a tab for 6 linked items. You can have a stash for 6 socketed items that you are working towards 6 linking whenever you've got fuses to do it. You can also have a stash tab that's just set aside for items that you want to corrupt. So I'll do this whenever I'm going to make a silly video when I'm trying to corrupt a whole bunch of stuff and see what the outcomes are. I'll just have a tab that's just sitting there collecting those items until I hit whatever the magic number is that I'm going to vol them all. If you've got project crafts, so I've got several different weapons as well as rare pieces of gear that I'm working on as crafts to mess around with, where I'm looking to hit specific rolls, whether they be good rolls or terrible rolls. It doesn't really matter. If it's a project that you want to craft on in standard, set that aside. Set that aside simply as its own stash tab. That way, as you're looking for that item, where was that weapon that I was working on? Where was that awesome amulet I was working on? You can simply go and just go, here's my project stash tab. This is where everything that I'm working on is located. Also, memorable items. So maybe you've got something from many leagues ago, or maybe you've got a particularly awesome item that you didn't even use on a particular build, but you didn't want to sell it, and you just want to display it. I know some people will display various items or various pieces of currency inside whole stash tabs, and they'll just like decorate and surround things, with scrolls of wisdom, with exalted orbs, with whatever currency or items they want to do. I had one buddy that decorated his entire stash tab with a bunch of face breakers, and then he just put like a vol orb in the middle of it. So anyway, memorable items that you want to keep and show off to yourself or to your friends. That's one way to do it, is to organize your stash tab in such a way that it's convenient and fun for you. And then lastly, of course, legacy gear. So if you've got legacy gear, consider putting it into an individualized stash tab, so that way you won't simply look at it and go, why was it that I kept this? You can name it as well if you've got the premium stash tab, where you can say, hey, this is legacy stuff. I know that I'll do that oftentimes. I actually went through a couple of leagues ago, and I was looking at my bestiary stuff that had those aspect rolls on it, and I was just looking at them like, why did I keep this? And then I was like, oh yeah, because at the time those were legacy rolls, so I kept them in my legacy tab, and that's how I knew not to simply get rid of them, because they have a particular memorable place in my own Path of Exile journey, so that's why they get to stay inside that particular stash tab. All right, fourthly and finally, the fourth pillar or hallmark or factor that you want to keep in mind is a vision for your standard stash tab. So as you're selling, organizing, and considering what to keep and what to ditch, consider first off, by revisiting your goals. Why are you keeping an item? Maybe it is that you do play standard with a friend, or maybe you use standard as a sandbox mode, or maybe you've got a particular goal or a particular challenge in standard that you want to take out. Why is it that you are keeping the item? Ask yourself, why am I keeping this currency? Why am I keeping this particular item? Is it for personal use, for wealth acquisition? Maybe it's a crafting base. Maybe it's for a friend. Maybe it's for build testing. Maybe it's just legacy gear and you want to keep it. You don't even want to sell it. But revisit your goals as you are asking yourself if it's worth your time to organize and to keep a particular item or a particular currency. Secondly, empty as many stash tabs as possible in the last week of the league. Anything that you don't or won't value in standard can be turned into currency or given away to conserve space. If you've got guildmates that you know play standard, if you've got friends that you know that play standard, and you know you're not going to use it, give it away. Get rid of it. Conserve your space as you're migrating over to standard. Get it out of your stash tabs. Put it on sale. I have sold so many things that weren't going to hold value in standard at the last couple of days of a league because somebody's doing an end of a league build and they're rushing through in the last 6 days. Believe it or not, there's players that do that in the last couple of days, in the last week or so of a league. There's a lot of players that will even be rushing for challenges. So if you've got particular items that are helpful or particular available gear that could be particularly helpful to somebody completing their challenges. A lot of players play a league during that last week in order to get their final challenges in. And so you'll actually see an uptick in trade. So if that's something that you're looking to do, is to flip or to make a little bit of profit off of something that you otherwise weren't going to keep in standard, then you can simply set it at a really, really low price and just be happy with whatever currency you get, because otherwise you were just going to turn it into scroll fragments anyway. Thirdly, items and currency that is being kept should be stored in League in such a way that having it in a remove only tab isn't a big deal. So everything migrates over into standard, and then it all becomes remove only tabs, which means as soon as you click it, you can't put it back in that particular tab. You've got to keep it on your character, or you've got to move it into another tab that you've got available. So one of the ways to preempt the frustration that comes from, I've got a bunch of remove only tabs and I don't know what to do with them and they're so disorganized, is to simply organize those tabs in League and say, hey, what could I potentially organize this tab with? So I'll give you a couple of examples. First off, every single league, I've got a bunch of extra flasks that aren't on my characters, but that I've rolled, or either rolled to sell or simply rolled to use for myself, and I've simply swapped them out throughout the course of a league. So I simply name a stash tab flasks, and then when that moves over into a remove only tab into standard league, that's totally fine. I know whenever I'm testing something out, if I need a flask, I know exactly where to go. I can go to that remove only tab. I don't need to go out and buy new tabs because I've got a remove only tab of those flasks. And chances are when I'm done with the flasks on my old characters, it may be because I actually needed an upgrade, because a lot of the times with each league I'm getting better at the game, and so I'm learning what flasks to keep and what flasks aren't valued. So every single league you're kind of refining this process and getting better at the things that you want to keep in remove only tabs. Fourthly, keep in mind to differentiate things that you want to leave in remove only tabs from things that you then want to transition into another stash tab inside Standard League. So on the one hand, like we just said with the example of flasks, hey, you've got stuff that it's okay to leave in a remove only tab. Then you've also got stuff that you don't want to leave in a remove only tab that you want to display somewhere else. So for instance, I've got several different color codings on my standard stash tab lists for unique weapons, unique accessories, unique armors, unique boots, as well as unique, I already said unique weapons, but unique helms and unique gloves. So I've got all of those different categories set out. So I know every single time I am migrating into a league, oh, if I've got a Comb's Heart, do I want to keep this? Yes, but I don't want to keep it in a remove only tab. I'm going to want to move that into my unique armor section. Oh, I've got a particularly awesome unique accessory. Move it into the unique accessories, whether that's unique ring, unique jewelry, etc. Oh, I've got a particularly awesome end game jewel that's got 4 or 5 stat lines on it. Okay, great. I've got a particular stash tab in Standard that I know is set aside for particularly awesome jewels that I've collected over the years. So make sure that you've got a space for it in Standard and that you've got a plan for it as you are migrating over exactly where you're going to keep it. Obviously, you're not going to want to keep something that you're going to want to remove from a remove only tab in one of those regular remove only tabs that you're perfectly fine leaving as a remove only. You're going to want to set it in a different spot. A lot of the times this is where I'll keep really awesome gear that I'm going to keep around. I'll just keep it on my character because then I know whenever I relog that character, it's kind of like Christmas where you're like, oh, wow, I totally forgot about this cool item. And you log back in and you see it in your character's inventory. And then you go and you migrate it and you move it around and you organize it in the way that you best see fit. All right, so those were 4 factors to consider, and we've got some questions, of course, for all of you. Hopefully those 4 factors were helpful for you. Those were just some of the factors that I use when I'm migrating from League to Standard. But first off, what are your own tips and tricks for storing items, maps, and currency? Do you have any particular methods or any particular styles of approach when it comes to storing your items, your goods in League and then moving them over into Standard? Leave us a comment down below, and of course let us know what your particular idiosyncrasies of storage are. How do you display and use your stuff in Standard? Do you have particular premium stash tabs that you use in a particular way? Do you organize things in a particular way? I often organize all of my specialized stash tabs at the very, very top of my list, so that way whenever I first log in and want to interact with anything, for instance, if I log in and I'm simply making a trade, all of my currency and fragment and map tabs are at the top, and then oftentimes I will list all of my sale tabs down below, and then even further down the list down below from there I will list all of the stuff that I want to keep, because when I'm selling something with to somebody in Standard, I want to be as fast as possible to get them a quick response time and a quick turnover time. So I want all of my sale tabs to be at the top of the list. But anyway, how do you display and use your stash in Standard? That's just some of my own tips that I do. And then what are you unsatisfied with regarding League migration of stash and inventory? Leave us a comment down below. What frustrates you? I know a lot of folks are really frustrated that there's not simply like a dump all tab from your inventory into a stash, or a remove all tab from a particular stash tab into your inventory. And I think those things would be some quality of life things that would be really, really helpful when we're talking about organizing and migrating from stash from one particular stash tab in one particular challenge league into another particular stash tab in Standard League. That would be really, really helpful. So leave us a comment down below about what frustrates you and maybe what you're unsatisfied with as you're prepping to migrate. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And I hope that today is a day that as you are sorting out your stash tabs, you randomly find a Mirror of Calandra. Don't leave it in a remove only tab. Display that thing with pride.